the recording.
Yeah.
Yep, it's starting. Good evening, everyone. Thanks so much for joining CMU Mumbai's first event of 2021, a special interactive interview with Ankit Nagori, founder of CureFit and ex-CBO of Flipkart. My name is Asha and Mansi and I will be hosting today. Before we start, I want to invite Rekha Koita, who is the head of CMU Mumbai, to say a few words to open the event. Rekha.
Hi, everyone, and thanks for joining in on time for our first event. We're very excited to, listen to this interview and this interactive session with Ankit. I think he's got quite an amazing journey where he started his entrepreneurial journey, very soon after college. And I think the whole, career path through Flipkart and then getting into health and fitness and making, using technology disruptively and the kind of growth that we've seen. I think it's really, going to be very interesting. So I don't want to take too much time. I'd like to hand it back to you, Ashay. And thank you very much, Ankit, for coming for this session. We're really happy to have you here today.
Thanks,
Ashay,
Rekha.
over to you.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Awesome. Thanks, Rekha. And, before we start, I think I would be letting myself and Ankit down, who through my research, I know who's a cricket fan, to not acknowledge our India's victory against Australia in the Test series last week. No one worked that day, and that's why I'm wearing blue as well today. But in many ways, the journey of a Test match is equivalent to a journey of life as well as a startup founder. It's all about grit, perseverance, taking the blows like Ashwin and Pujara did, but still staying on and living to fight another day. And Ankit, your story has been equally inspiring. As Rekha mentioned, starting YouthPad, taking the learnings to Flipkart, taking it to the next level, and now starting CureFit and scaling that as well. So welcome. We have over 220 registrations today across the board from alumni of all the Ivy League colleges, IIT, IIM, our friends and family, importantly, who are very excited to hear from you. So I'll invite you to say a few words of welcome before we get started.
Thanks, Asha. Really happy to be here, and it's a good timing. Late evenings work well because then we can extend the sessions as long as we want. So we'll keep it very interactive. Also, you did mention the test match and how our entrepreneurial journey is very similar. In fact, this reminds me of one of the blogs I had written a few years back where I'd spoken about the fact how life is a very long journey and you have to live it decade by decade. And every decade, 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, bring in new challenges. So probably in today's conversation, we'll cover some of those things. And yes, let's keep it very interactive and I'll be as candid as possible.
Awesome. And speaking of interactive, so the format is as follows that I'll be interviewing Ankit for 40 minutes or 45 minutes. To the audience, the Q&A box is open. So as we go through the interview, please pull in your questions. And at the end, we'll have 15 minutes where Mansi will curate the questions. And Ankit has graciously agreed to stay on and answer more questions after 8 o'clock as well. So for whoever wants to stay. Today's topic is around scaling businesses in India. And, the traditional Indian business that has to deal with uncertainty and lack of resources uses Jugaad to go forward. To go from 0 to 1 that's what you need and have been needing in India for a while. But Jugaad can take you from 0 to 1. The way you go from 1 to 5 or 5 to 10 is by systems and scaling, something that Ankit has done very well across Flipkart and CureFit. So we'll be exploring that. But before we delve into that, Ankit, it's important to kind of understand where someone comes from. So you graduated IIT Guwahati at a time when startups or starting a company wasn't as sexy as it is today. You went against what your peers were doing. So can you walk us through what made you get away from the peer pressure, start a company? And looking back, would you recommend the same path, or would you recommend someone learning more, working somewhere, and then starting a company after that?
Great. So, Asha, if I have to look back at my journey and think whether I took the right decisions or if I would do it any differently, probably, I was lucky enough to, get the right success after a few trials. But if I have to, look at why the decisions I took, I did, right? So, when I was at IIT, I was very clear that, while I was studying engineering and design, I was not someone who would pursue that for my professional life. So had I taken up a job, it would have been a completely different domain, not this. But at the same time, I was extremely clear that I wanted to start up my own company in very soon. and hence I did not take up the campus job. I started off by working for a few months, 3-4 months, in a startup, just observing the founder there and trying to learn. And within 4 months of finishing school, I started YouthPad. YouthPad, I feel, was of course a little early for its time. I was trying to build a social media sentiment analysis tool and a college engagement platform. And of course, it did not pan out the way it should have. But the 2 years plus journey was very, very insightful on the various needs a startup has. Of course, a need for a technology team, need for funding, and need for a co-founder. All these three things became extremely clear. And late 2009, early 2010 is when I joined Flipkart, because that's when it was really beginning to make noises. Of course, it was not the behemoth it is now. It was a pretty much a small startup, but still they were doing a 1 crore a month revenue, which was unheard of back then.
At that time,
so it seemed as though it was a great opportunity to join them and learn. And while the idea was to stay on only for a couple of years, but of course I got an opportunity to grow within Flipkart, and of course even Flipkart grew like a few thousand times from where I joined. And it was a beautiful journey. And of course there was this hunger to start something, and hence after Flipkart we started CureFit. But overall, the desire to build a company in India was always there. It was very clear. I don't want to go abroad and study and work there. I was also very clear I didn't want to take up a software job in the country for the medium term. Not that they're not the right options. A lot of my friends are doing extremely well in these. In a different universe, I would probably do the same. But in this universe, I was probably looking to create impact in India by creating an Indian company. That pursuit has been on. Flipkart, of course, went on to become what it is now. CureFit is on its way, and now also we've hived off EatFit. I'm sure we'll talk about the journey, and trying to take a 0 to 1 journey. Actually, not 0 to 1, 1 to 10 journey for EatFit there. We'll talk more about it. But interestingly, if you look at the top 6 food brands in the country, all of them are American. None of the Indian brands feature. So right from McDonald's, Burger King, etc. So if there's so many Indian brands created in every category, there is no other category that I can think of where an Indian brand is not in top 5, whether it's cars or FMCG or e-commerce or anything else. Food probably is the last big consumer category. So probably that's the journey. So Indian entrepreneurship, Indian growth, and overall Indian talent is the theme which I've tried to follow in the last few years.
Fantastic. And that journey is extremely inspiring. I actually read the book. I'm reading the book called A New Idea of India by Harsh Gupta. And he mentions 2 watershed moments in Indian startup world. One was when Ratan Tata started investing his personal funds into startups. And second was when Flipkart sold to Walmart for $16 billion. And obviously you were there for that journey. That's when Indian families started being okay, chalo startup karega, not doing engineering. And so credit to you for that. So moving back to your journey at Flipkart. So, you started with the media side, electronics, you grew the categories, and you scaled from 10,000 to 50,000 sellers. So what was that journey in terms of scaling in India? What were the challenges that you faced? India, every 200 kilometers, your language changes, culture changes, and you're dealing with logistics as well as the technology side of it. So what are the realities of the scaling, and how did you understand the Indian consumer mindset before you did that?
Yeah, so to answer this question, Asha, I'll not only speak about the thing which I did, but also as a team we did, because it'll help answer the question better.
Right.
So I think in 2011 and 12, when Flipkart really started scaling, there were 2 or 3 very clear areas identified. The area identified was that people don't use credit cards. Second was the existing logistics company then. Of course, the ecosystem is very different now. Some amazing logistics companies exist in the country now. Back then, they were not tuned for larger parcels and speed and tracking and all of that. That was the second problem. And third, there was this whole issue of buying online. There's so much trust deficit in the country. Actually, if you look back at the history and how we have evolved as a nation, even in 2010, we were just a 50-year-old nation, 60 year-old nation. And, first 30, 40 years were economically very slow, and post 90s or whatever growth happened.
Yep.
So the overall trust deficit in the whole commerce process is there, where you feel that, the larger organizations are trying to fleece you, are there to fleece you. So, to break this whole trust service it, getting people to show confidence in what they're trying to do or buying. There were the three big things. So logistics, payments, and overall trust. So some of the pioneering things that happened, and I was very happy to be part of the team which was able to implement it. Was, of course, the first was cash on delivery. I think it is something which is so inherent right now. I was talking to some current IIT students, and in 2010 they would have been 10 years old, so they would not know that cash on delivery does not exist. So for them, cash on delivery has always existed. But until 2012, cash on delivery was extremely difficult to execute in the country. Likewise, 30-day returns. Of course, in the US, you can buy a dress offline, use it, go back, return it. Retailers won't have an issue. Of course, this is all not ethically correct, but they don't have a problem with that. In India, to be able to launch a 30-day returns, no question asked policy was huge. The amount of abuse would have been huge. The amount of losses would have been huge. But because also we built a great brand and a great customer franchise, basically not something like a discount model or something. We built high quality customer base, so we were able to execute it. And lastly, the whole logistics piece, which I think is huge. That is the biggest reason why Flipkart is what it is today. Is the whole logistics setup which Flipkart was able to create. We created our own network. It's called eCart now. Of course, everyone knows that now. But 2011, it did not exist. We were still using the DTDCs and Blue Darts of the world. Of course, they had their own limitation. They've all scaled up to become extremely good at e-commerce, but we all learned it together. But at that time, we needed something to work faster, and eCart came into being. So these are the three pillars which helped Flipkart become what it is then. And then what were the other things on top of that? Selection, service, price. So the three foundational pieces were the customer pieces I spoke about. But why did Flipkart win? Because of selection, service, price. You could virtually go to Flipkart and find anything, and customers would be amazed that if they were looking for a book which they were looking for many years, and you searched it, you would find it. Likewise, the promise was that it will always be cheaper than the next store. And lastly, service. In 2011 itself, 50% plus products were shipped within 2 days. I think that number must be in late 70s now. I'm not too sure. But assuming how market has moved, 70% customers would be getting their products within 2 days. I'm guessing 50% within 1 day. So in 2011-12 itself, the number was 50% getting in 2 to 3 days. So selection, service, price, the best customer support team where if you ever had to call them up, it would not be like 10-minute wait times, etc. We metrics which would track what is the average wait time. The metrics would track which would be around whether you had a first call resolution or not. So all of these things were being done in India for the first time. Of course, Airtel was known for a better service than Orange, Hutch, Vodafone back then. But and they had a great NPS too. And one other thing which Flipkart I think has done really well has made NPS a very popular metric. The Net Promoter Score, which is a way to measure how happy your customers are. Before that, I think it was a rarely used metric in the Indian customer segment. It was not done so frequently. Some brands would do it once in 2 years. Some brands would do it like once in a while. But it became a great talking point. And the fact that the NPS was doing such, and we at Flipkart was a 60 to 70 NPS, which I think in US, Apple, Amazon would be there. I'm guessing Flipkart would be at a similar number now. And all these numbers were extraordinary. So that's helped Flipkart become what it is.
Right. Absolutely. And that journey was phenomenal. And I think what you did for the socio-economic fabric of the country, like, you have now house helps and everyone ordering on Flipkart, which is something phenomenal to, achieve in a country as big as India. That's what Flipkart achieved. But in terms of, so in your interview with Mint, you had said when you all scaled to 100 sellers, 1 lakh sellers, that was a pain point in which, there were customer service issues or scaling culture issues. So could you talk about what that process taught you in terms for scaling, and what can companies learn from that experience of Flipkart scaling to 1 lakh sellers?
Yeah, I think I've been very vocal about it in the past, and I've spoken about it. The fact that when I took on the marketplace opportunity, where we thought that in addition to Flipkart selling to its customers, we'll also onboard smaller retailers selling. we thought it would help increase selection significantly, which it did. But we realized over time that all sellers were not as customer obsessed as we thought they would be.
Yep.
And in the hindsight, I could have onboarded those sellers in a slower fashion, in a smaller fashion,
right,
and done it after we built a lot more systems. Of course, now that number must be over 100,000.
Right.
But what Flipkart also now has is brilliant tools and services.
Correct.
So there are carrot and stick services built on Flipkart, where if you are a seller, even if you're doing great numbers, you might be shut down if your quality is poor. So
right.
I think there's a great lesson there, and a lot of startups which start and scale, they always have this conundrum whether they build first-party supply. Example would be whether Cult should do our own gyms or take on third-party gyms and brand them as Cult.
Correct.
Strategy.
Right.
So there are pros and cons of both. There are people who have done it really well. Uber, Ola is 100% third-party strategy. Meru Cabs back then, if anyone remembers that brand, was the first-party strategy. They scaled slower, but they would be in better control. Of course, now Ola, Uber is so high, so huge that they've been able to solve for all the pain points.
Correct.
So I would say that it's a big call to be taken as a business model, whether you want third-party supply or first-party supply. My suggestion, and again, it's limited to what I feel, not taking a larger trend in mind, is for any small company to start. It would be best if they're able to sell one small unit which they create, whether it's retail, whether it's food, whether it's software, whether it's education content. They should sell first-party product for the first couple of years. If it starts scaling, if you see signs of growth, then you should be able to scale it,
the model,
and take it to third party or partners or any other engagement model. So that's how it should be thought through. That's my sense.
Got it. I think that this is a great insight into how to build a playbook and scale across, find that one niche that you're successful at, and then replicate across the country. And I think it's a good segue into CureFit. So, I mean, I'm going to bring in a cricket analogy again. And Kevin Peterson says, like, the good batsmen play the shots, but the best batsmen find the gaps and play the shots. So you exited Flipkart at a time after the sale and founded CureFit, and I've seen your videos on how you did the market research. So could you walk us through what's the biggest gap that you saw in the fitness industry and the wellness industry, and how you went and understood consumer mindset when you started CureFit?
Right. So after spending all those years at Flipkart, my co-founder for CureFit, of course, Mukesh, was also the founder of Myntra. It had merged with Flipkart a couple of years back when we started, and he was also looking for his next entrepreneurial stint. We started discussing about what are the large 10, 20, 30-year plays in the country. And then 3 to 4 areas looked very, very good. One was clean tech, transport, the whole Tesla, Uber, Ola, that huge space, of course. The second one is health. We'll get to that later. Third one was education, which now is playing out in the biggest possible manner. And fourth was probably fintech, financial services, accessibility to capital, etc. So after doing pros and cons, doing all kinds of analysis, we realized that health and fitness is one category where we both had deep interest and also seemed like a huge opportunity. Some of the characteristics of the health industry which still exists, it's an extremely large category, but very, very fragmented. The largest players of health fitness, if I include very, very disparate industries as well. Some hospitals are very big, some pharma companies, not the manufacturing companies, but the distribution company. Of course, some manufacturing companies are very, very big because they also export. A lot of billionaires from India are pharma billionaires. But if you look at consumer facing products, of course, hospitals are there, diagnostics companies are there. Talwalkar was there, which is a large gym chain. You could not think of, what is a Flipkart equivalent or what is an Ola equivalent in that category. And that's what we realized, that while it's a huge category, people are spending in a very piecemeal manner. They're not spending a whole amount together. And the other characteristic was that, insurance does not exist. Only 17% people have insurances, that too, that includes the state-sponsored insurance, that includes the company-sponsored insurance. But even if you have those, in many cases, you have to do the out-of-pocket spend. So largely, it seemed like a large cash-rich category and something which was extremely, the potential to consumerize it was there in a big way. So putting all of that together, we realized that to win the health category, you need to actually, stitch together an ecosystem. You cannot just have fitness or food or diagnostics or mental wellness. If you need to be healthy, you need to do all of these every single day. So what you need is a technology platform which can stitch this together and make it easy for you to consume these products. And that's exactly what CureFit started becoming.
Right.
We launched 4 services back then, and we decided to build it in like one category only. We decided to build it in a way where one city only. We decided to build in a way where every one city should have all the services. So we started in Bangalore, started with Cult, the food service Fit, mental wellness service MindFit, and the digital primary care CareFit. And the idea was to run it in a few cities and then create digital versions of these. The digital version of these, of course, got expedited thanks to COVID. Having the digital solution for almost all of these categories, and also launched it internationally in July this year. So idea would be to continue building a health platform which combines all these categories and makes it easy for consumers to consume these. And over time, we'll bring third-party suppliers, partners, brands, etc. Like I mentioned, the idea right now is to build our own content, own supply, etc.
Right. And I think that is a very interesting point that you made, that to build that ecosystem as opposed to piecemeal, because if I think of health in India, it's very difficult to understand across the generations what they think of health. I personally, even I don't like track my steps every day. I mean, I play cricket, I go for a run, I do some weights. But your stats were pretty staggering. You said there were 16 crore people that had diabetes in India. 20 crore people who suffer from depression, 4 crore people who are heart patients. So as CureFit, and depending on your target audience, how do you enable this behavioral change that, okay, hame track karna hai, data-driven approach to fitness? How do you change that behavior, and how do you scale that behavior across?
See, to all the diseases which you spoke of are a kind of cardiovascular diseases. Most of them stem from lifestyle. These are also, you can also call them lifestyle diseases. The thing about lifestyle diseases is that it is something which can be prevented and also reversed if you follow a healthy lifestyle. Healthy lifestyle can be easily broken down into 5-6 simple activities. People who don't like to work out, for them 10,000 steps every day, sleeping 7 to 8 hours, meditating 10 minutes a day, eating at least 2 healthy meals, probably 1 raw meal a day. So if you do this, you'll be healthy. But the problem is, one, accessibility. Getting healthy meals is tough if you're staying alone. Finding good content is tough. The fitness tracker to track your fitness. So what we thought, and of course, going to gyms is extremely difficult. COVID, I think digital content was not existent at all. So if you look at all of these pieces put together, the biggest opportunity was to make things easy for customers. And Cult, as an example, made it extremely easy for the customers. There were no weights, there were no complicated ways of doing the gym. There was a tracking on how many classes have you done. You had to book a class and then come. You have to book a class and then come. It makes it almost compulsory for you to attend, because if you've committed that you're going, you can't flip last minute. So all of these things put together, the idea was to gamify the whole thing, put everything together, make people count how much they're consuming, make people aware of their stats. You can easily go to the app and see I've consumed 10 healthy meals this month. And again, it's like only 5 years of a 20-30 year journey, or probably more. So the idea would be to keep creating these gamified experiences over time.
Right. And that's a very interesting approach that you took. And the one thing about technology startups is that the reason they could scale much faster is because you don't have to interact with the traditional factors such as labor laws, land, production, factory permissions. But with Cult, what was unique is that you all acquired the brand, but also opened 200 Cult centers across the country. So how did you manage that? Every city, every state has a different way outlook, different regulations. So what was scaling? What were the challenges in scaling that, if any?
Right. So Asha, if I look back at the Cult journey, the experience was not very different from Flipkart, because even if Flipkart, today is there, it would have 1,000 plus or probably a few thousand now dispatch centers. The difference was that Cult were customer facing, and the experience had to be extremely same. So the first principle that we built was that the content at every Cult center has to be exactly the same. So if there's a yoga class happening at a center in Bombay or Chandigarh, the content or the workout of the day has to be exactly the same.
Correct.
Secondly, we said that if you are inside a Cult center, whether you are in Delhi or Kochi, you should not get to know it's a different center. It should just look exactly the same. So a lot of focus on standardization, a lot of focus on making sure that customers, who are there, they're able to, get exactly same experience. We built product in a way where a person would go to multiple different centers within the same city or in a different center if they're traveling. So idea was to create a very customized experience. We achieved that through a training academy. All our trainers have to go through training. They are physically in the same center, but now it's all virtual and digital as well. And the other thing was, standardizing our build of material, like exactly how an Apple store looks like an Apple store across the world. We took a similar philosophy. Apple is a great inspiration there from a retail design point of view.
Right.
And lastly, given that the workout was very similar every single day, it helped us, create a very standardized experience. And each time you do a class, you will get a feedback box, and it's a huge rich data, huge pool of data for us. We get, not only for Cult, but Eat Fit and other formats, we get so much data real time that we're able to really change and improve the product every single day.
Right. And I think one thing that's interesting is that you standardized across the country, even in such a diverse country. So again, to understand, I think one of your interviews I read that you used to always you travel around the country to talk to people to understand mindset. I think you went to Bihar to talk to people at a dhaba. So how did you go about understanding consumer mindset? Because Cult is extremely popular. All my friends use it. I know across the cities, everyone uses it. It seems like it broke through the age barrier as well. So how did you go about understanding that consumer mindset?
Yeah, so this is not specific to Cult or Eat Fit or Flipkart, right? I think over the last few years, I have formed a thesis that if you look at customers in tier 1 cities or the top 5-6 metros, they are very much alike. All of them are very alike, and they're not the typical Indian customer you want to build products for.
Right.
You, me, other people in this group, they are no different from our friends living in Hong Kong, New York, and any city. So we are very, very cosmopolitan in approach. And if we think of us as the consumer segment, we'll end up building a product which is not extremely nuanced. If you want to build a product for India and for a larger customer base, you have to go talk to people in the tier 2 markets, because we all don't have any special characteristic as a customer. We are very, very fungible. We'll buy every service out there. Right. So if you want to build a product which, some people buy and for them it's a huge investment, you need to build an extremely good product. And that's where meeting customers in tier 2. So affluent customers in tier 2 markets are the best way of, and when I say affluent, I'm not talking about like HNIs. I'm talking about people who make 6-7 lakh rupees a year, like 50,000 plus. So I feel if you have to build products for India, you need to go meet people who are 50,000 to 2 lakh rupees monthly income, and they will give you the most nuanced answer, because for them any spend is almost discretionary. It's not important for them, and they need to really choose between going to a gym or taking up a nutritionist service. But in Delhi, if you're talking to a software engineer living in Bangalore or working in Gurgaon, if they have to lose weight, they'll say, okay, I'll do a keto diet. I'll also, fast, I'll do intermittent fasting. I'll talk to a nutritionist and also go to Cult. So for them, the wallet share is very different. So if you have to build a great product, you have to do that. And I feel, the Chinese phone brands have done that extremely well. If you look at Xiaomi, OnePlus is still the cream of the cream, but Xiaomi, Vivo, Oppo, we talk about how well entrenched they are in the market. They have done that extremely well, where they know exactly what a tier 2 market customer wants. And when the BBD happens, and you spoke about the house helps, ordering on
Flipkart.
That behavior is completely driven by the Big Billion Day. The fact that it falls on Dhanteras, it falls on Durga Puja, it falls during the Dussehra. Everyone has pushed their purchase to online on those days. And hence, on those days, the number of people buying online is like 10x of on a regular day. And all the segments that you spoke of get and can enter the e-commerce bandwagon then. And of course, continue to buy as and when they need. So I think talking to tier 2 market affluent customers is a great way of understanding what they need.
Interesting. And it reminded me of the one newsletter I was reading from Kunal Shah at Cred. And he spoke about how in India, 25 million households are the ones that drive most of the spends. But you have a different take to it is when you're talking to folks with the 50,000 to 2 lakh salary who give you a different...
That is the 25 million household, Ashay. So slightly dated data, I think in 2017 or 18, there were only 1 crore people in India with more than 5 lakh salary. So,
wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So that's, that highlights the importance of market analysis and how you target your segment. And before we move to EatFit, I want to understand, so the COVID, I think the pivot that CureFit made during COVID was a big pivot, going from that experiential, like all my friends love Cult and everyone, because they go there with their friends, they can book classes, whatever they want. But now you have to move online. And Samar Singla, who's also attending, who's a founder of Jugnu, when I had interviewed him, he had said about entrepreneurs being low maintenance, that helps them adapt and be flexible when such situations come about. So how was that pivot to online for CureFit during COVID? And what were the challenges in scaling that platform so fast because it came so suddenly?
Right. So luckily enough, not luckily, it was a very conscious choice by my co-founder Mukesh that we should over years invest in content, digital content, because we always wanted to be a digital content company over the years, right? And if you want to serve millions of people, you can't go about building offline centers. It's a great business, but not the business which will get you millions of customers. So we've been building this content, but of course, COVID left us with no choice. And thankfully, we had this content library which we could use. And the team rallied behind this idea, and within a few weeks we have this huge platform ready where we were able to serve millions of customers every single day. And that's something which worked very well. I think the pivot has helped now. Of course, when the centers are coming back to life, it has helped us create a model which is a hybrid model. And like I mentioned, the whole, like how in education the whole digital adoption has been expedited because of COVID. It has happened in fitness across the world. We can see what's happening with Peloton in the US and many apps across the countries. So that also helped. As part of the COVID, we also realized, how our food business should be built in future. Of course, I am a huge believer of the fact that, the next 10 years belongs to companies which lie in the intersection of healthy food, cloud kitchen, and Indian brands. So EatFit, of course, falls right in the middle of this intersection. But when I say healthy, on CureFit, we can only sell one kind of healthy, which is like really healthy. Which is, helpful for weight loss or staying fit, etc. But then there are many other categories where it's not just healthy, but it's better for you. Imagine a gourmet pizza brand, which is whole wheat pizza, but some gourmet cheese, like a focaccia or something, and you're able to create a very, very good experience. You can't expect people to stop eating pizzas, but you can create a better for you experience. Likewise, a better for you smoothie, a better. So I believe that EatFit should own this segment where it's of course healthy, and they can continue. We can continue selling those SKUs on CureFit and other and within cult centers if you do. But if you really want to capture the overall market of people beginning to eat healthier, beginning to become conscious, you need to have multiple categories. And some of these categories might not be relevant within the CureFit ecosystem. So we've spun it off in a way where EatFit will have its own journey. EatFit will continue selling to, of course, the CureFit and the cult customers, but will also create more opportunities of consumption. And some of the work is happening. We're looking at some Indianized versions of fast food and how we can tap into group eating occasions, entertainment occasions, and make people eat healthier. So that's the thought process. That's a big pivot coming out of COVID.
Right. And that's great. I mean, congrats for taking CureFit from good to great. I mean, today it's valued at over $700 million, and now you started EatFit. So what are your views on the ready-to-eat market in India? So are you primarily targeting the middle-class folks working at a job who don't have time to cook? Or are you changing the behavior, for example, for my father and my mother as well, who like to cook at home, but now would like to have a more customized approach to food through EatFit that you recommend across an ecosystem?
So we're taking a two-pronged approach. The first category I'll come to later. The easier one is to talk about the real health category.
Yep.
So within EatFit, we have these goal-based subscriptions, which pre-COVID was also a large revenue for us, and still it's pretty decent. These are goal-based packs where you can lose weight, you can build immunity, etc.
Right.
And these meals show up at your desk or doorstep every single day.
Right.
While we would love a pretty large range of age for these meals, we have not seen that. We still feel that 30-40-year-olds are doing it, but I feel over the next 5 years period we'll be able to create a product which 15 to 60-year-olds can use for various goals. That becomes the core health product which we will be known for, which we will live for. But the larger volumes or the larger base would come from the 25-year-olds, 27-year-olds living in cities, like top 15 cities in the country, working long hours. They don't have, a cooking setup at home. In fact, talking about the cooking setup, I have a very strong point of view there as well. I feel that having a cooking setup at home is one of the most wasteful things that you could have. If you have 1,000 square feet house, you end up dedicating 100 or 150 square feet to a kitchen. You set up a mini industry in your house. You set up a gas. You set up equipment. You source raw products every day. It's almost like a supply chain running. So people who are not very passionate about cooking or eating home cooked food, there is no need for them to exist. Uber's founder Travis has started this company called the Cloud Kitchen, which is creating these large industrial scale kitchen. And he launched that kitchen. I think it put out this memo saying that 150 years back, everyone had a tailoring room in their houses. Everyone used to stitch their own clothes, and everyone had a tailoring room in the US. Even we all have seen, our grandmothers have a sewing machine, and they used to sew or knit sweaters. I think no one is doing that. So ready-made clothes have killed that industry completely, or killed that. I feel 15 to 20 years later, it will happen. We've already seen that happen in cities like Tokyo, Hong Kong, New York, where houses are small, people don't cook. I've been to a couple of my friends' houses in Hong Kong. They don't even have a dry pantry there because they can't afford to. The houses are 400 square feet, so 350 square feet. I'm talking about an investment banker.
Right. Wow.
So you can't really imagine a pretty large setup. So for that, you end up actually. I think I've lost. Can you guys hear me? I think I lost it.
Yeah, I can hear.
Yeah. So I think cooking at home will be tough. So that over the next 10 years, we'll continue targeting people who think cooking at home is difficult, but they still want to eat healthier, who want to make sure that they're not indulging. There were two segments of eating unhealthy. One is entertainment, which is Friday night ordering in for a game night. I think we want to own that, where we will create healthier occasions. Example of that is a whole wheat pizza with low fat cheese. That's an example. The largest category for food for us, which has been massively hit because of COVID, was the corporate meals. Imagine lakhs and lakhs of people living in Bangalore, Gurgaon, Chennai, Hyderabad, where bulk of orders were coming from. They would eat like really, really bad food in office. What is catered on the rooftops of most companies. And that's where we had made a massive dent in the industry, where we were delivering 30,000-40,000 meals to corporates alone every day. And that business will come back when work from home changes. But that will be one of the largest segments for future. So 3 segments, if I may. First is the healthy goal-based selection. That is our North Star. In next 10 years, I feel that is what we'll be known for. Second is office meals. That is our volume driver. And third is, the early adopter, the late adopters, or people who are sitting on the fence. If they don't want to eat healthy, they will eat healthier. By ordering in a healthy pizza or a healthy burger.
Right. Got it. And that's a fascinating take about people not cooking at home. I don't know how much my mom would appreciate that, but I think the behavior will change slowly and surely. And
I would actually, stretch the logic and say that in many cases, home cooked food is not essentially healthy. We don't even know, like, if you have a cook coming to your house and cooking for you, what's the guarantee that she's cooking healthy? So
Right. And that's a fascinating perspective. So, last couple of questions on EatFit before we move into the Q&A. So, and once again, all the attendees, please keep putting your questions in. We have already 8 questions. You'll be able to ask Ankit your questions directly. We'll unmute you. So, Ankit, before we move into Q&A, I want to ask you this. So, if I think of an ecosystem, I see a personalized, data-driven way of CureFit telling me how I need to exercise, or MindFit monitoring my mental health, or at least giving me suggestions, and EatFit accordingly curating a meal service for me based on my body type, progress, monthly, daily progress and goals. So is that the vision, to scale that full ecosystem at personal? How are you thinking of scaling personalization if that's the ultimate goal? If I'm assuming that's the goal.
Yeah, I think personalization can be achieved by creating canned plans, Ashay. So if you look at all kinds of goals and all kinds of conditions, so there could be 10 large conditions: people with thyroid, people with diabetes, people with hypertension, male, female, elder, younger. So if you just look at these 20 segments, and some of them would have a cholesterol goal, some of them will have a weight loss goal, some of them would have a some other goal. So if I just map all of these, it could be like 100 plans. So what we need to create is 100 plans. For you, it is personalized, but for us, it's not. It's not like last mile personalization. We're creating canned plans, and that's the approach we've been taking for our food plan, and I'm sure for other fitness plans as well.
Right.
It's a finite world of problem statements, So
right.
if I actually look at, we're trying to create a database of recipes and ingredients at EatFit, and I realized that beyond 200, 300 ingredients, everything is a very long tail. So likewise, if I say I want all Indian food recipes, to be there, you can't cross 2000. So there is no need of personalization or customization. Everything can be put inside a canned plan.
Interesting. Okay. And that's, again, a unique perspective I'm hearing from you, because you see a lot of data-driven companies looking at personalization. Your Facebook, Google ads all tailored to you, but this is a...
I think Facebook and Google, Ashay, are extremely large data. And, it is extremely large database, but most of the companies which are mid-size and dealing with 100,000 customers to 1 million customers, most of the customization and personalization can be done through rule engine, and just decision trees, rather than using the buzzwords of AI and all of that.
Right. Fair enough. And Ankit, you've been you don't have a background in food, and you didn't have a background in ultimate fitness. So before we move into Q&A, what's your view in an outsider in entering a space versus I've seen a lot of founders who work in an industry, find a gap, they know the whereabouts, they have the connection, they start hive off a business out of that, versus you who've learned fast, adapted, and entered into a space that you didn't necessarily have a background. So what's your view on the outsider perspective?
I think I feel it helps in many places, but having domain expertise is very important. So if I have entered the food domain, 2 things are important. One, passion for the space. So I am a huge foodie. I think I think I drive my energy by just eating better food every day. I think the other thing is being able to learn the nuances of the category, and that's one thing which I would attribute some of my learning to, some of my success to. If I enter one industry, I am able to spend a lot of time learning about that industry, and which is why at Flipkart I was able to run different businesses at different point in time. And now that, of course, we've been in food for a while as CureFit, but now that I'm spending a bulk of my time on EatFit, I'm discovering, the extremely, smaller nuances of being in a food business.
Right.
And it requires a lot of, observation, talking to consumers, and a lot of reading. That's another thing, which luckily, I am fond of, and I'm able to, learn a lot through reading. So.
Awesome. And that's great advice to any entrepreneur who's watching and, a little hesitant to enter a space without having experience. So thanks, Ankit, for that. We have hit at 7:45, so there's a lot. We already have 11 questions in, so we want to get as many as possible. So Mansi, can you turn on your video and unmute yourself?
There we go.
You can choose the questions and I can unmute them.
Sure. So firstly, Ankit, thank you so much. I think that was extremely insightful and entertaining. Some very interesting perspectives on food. There are lots of questions which are from very different points of view. So the first one is actually from our professor Sundar Kekre, and he's a professor at the Tepper School of Business. And sir, the floor is yours. Please ask your question.
Professor Kekre, you're on mute. Please unmute and ask your question.
Ankit, that was a wonderful talk. I enjoyed it. And I think you should certainly come down to Tepper here and whenever we have a chance to meet you in person and interact with the students. My question to you is, with post-COVID, if you see how our lifestyles have changed here in Pittsburgh. For example, we are having, you talked about health activities, you talked about eating. What I'm finding here is people are getting a little restless that the entertainment part of it is missing. We are trying to organize Tinpatti sessions online, and that's becoming difficult. Karaoke sessions with Zoom is very difficult. Our friends and family would like to get together for morning prayers or yoga sessions, etc. So given, I see you're bringing a lot of new services in your business. What are the future plans in terms of acquisitions where you can provide a new way of delivering services at home, where I think people are going to start working from home more and more, and how will that change your strategy?
Right. So thanks for your question. I'll take it in two parts. One is related to COVID, and second is related to just wealth creation. Yeah. And again, I'll use some of my observations to answer this question. So COVID, I think India is ahead of the curve with respect to US, with respect to unlock, and right. Some of it is driven by government and some of it is voluntarily done by the Janta here. Not sure if it's good or bad. So the fact that, there were questions about how it will permanently change the behavior of the consumers, given that it lasted more than a few quarters. I feel that, humans are very, very, they adapt very easily, and they also don't want to change their decades-old habits, right? So I think so a human being, the social animal that it is, we will not be, I don't foresee a lot of older habits of entertainment, socializing, playing a sport, moving in gatherings to change. But there will be certain categories that will change because that did not need to be a social activity at all. Like gymming. If you go to a typical gym, like a typical gym where there are treadmills, there are machines, a lot of people don't know each other. And in many cases, you're working with your personal trainer. So it need not be a social activity. It's just time sharing of equipment. But if you're able to create a similar experience at home, then it would become a at-home activity. Likewise, going to an office cafeteria and eating in the office cafeteria need not be a social activity. In large companies like TCS or Infosys, you would not know people beyond your group. So you need not go to a cafeteria which has 10,000 people coming in. You can eat in smaller groups, order on your desk and eat. So I feel that a lot of the behavior which came in for lack of any other means will change. In the medium term, in the short term, what will definitely change is how people socialize. I think Zoom and Zoom for X, Zoom for education, Zoom for entertainment. Some of these startups have cropped up. I know of people doing hobby classes for kids. I feel they should exist, but it cannot replace a basketball class or a football class in person. You can probably learn a language from an Italian teacher sitting in Rome. Someone who can teach you English and Italian, English to Italian translation. But I don't think it will change a lot of other things. The other socio-economic aspect of at-home services. If you look at, I don't know how long back were you in India and how you've seen the progress. If you look at a few decades back, a lot of services for the most affluent people were at home. Doctors would come at home. The barbers would come at home. The tailors would come at home to take your measurements. So I think humans also, again, this is out of observation. I have not done any analysis. I would love to go deeper to understand this behavior. But humans also like the comfort of their house for their chores. So if you can actually, reduce the going out of house for their chores, then it will be easier. So food coming to you, your doctor coming to you, or your trainer coming to your house through digital means or in person. There is a startup in India, it's called Urban Clap. I have moved 100% to it for my haircut needs and other needs. So I think people coming to your house for your personal convenience is going to be a big trend, because socioeconomically also it's something which will help. But people going out for their socializing aspects or meeting new people or the entertainment will continue. And I really feel if India is a sign of how things will be for across the world, it's a matter of few months after post which the world would go back to 90% of what it was in terms of stepping out of houses.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for your comments.
Thank you, Professor Kekre. Hope to see you soon.
Yes, sir.
Right. So the next question we'll take from Rahul. Rahul has actually 2 questions. So Ashif, you can unmute Rahul Valvalkar.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thanks, Akshay and Mansi. Hi, Ankit. It's a pleasure to meet you. I'm a member of Cure.fit, and for the first time in my life, I've started enjoying going to gym. So I think one of the things which I enjoyed is sort of the in-person experience and the culture which you have built with all the trainers. And so how did you go about building that organization? And then one related question is that obviously with the COVID, you guys have gone the digital, and personally as a member, I think at home, it has been a great, I think during COVID time, I've done more than 250 sessions at home, which I think otherwise would have been completely impossible. But how have you been able to take care of the trainers or other support staff without having the in-person activities? So.
Right. So thanks, Rahul. Thanks for thanks for being a member of Cult and CureFit. Yeah, I think the biggest reason why we've been able to create that culture is a great word that you use. I would have used it otherwise. Because of our training academy, whenever a new person joins the team, he or she is taken through a boot camp, on the job training, and before they start taking classes, they are very, very well trained. But even before that, how we choose our trainers, a very large part of our training network actually comes from sporting backgrounds. It was a chance discovery. Our first set of trainers were India's rugby team members, and we realized that the amount of game time which they get is very limited, and they would need a full-time job. So they started training at Cult, and then we used it as a template. Ex-runners, ex-footballers. Sad thing about sports people is that at 32, 33, their career is over, and they have to restart. So, and they are the best fit for our fitness job. They are passionate about fitness. They're passionate about sports. They're passionate about coaching. They are very disciplined. So that is the first biggest take. And precisely for that, for my love, for my passion for sports, love for sports, and also, after having seen this, I recently started a foundation. It's called Simply Sport Foundation. It is something, where I'll be spending at least 20% of my time building this out, where we'll support sports people in 2 ways. One, we'll go to the grassroots and develop that talent pipeline. And second, people who are on the fag end of their sporting career will figure out how they can, continue their career either as being coaches or trainers or PT teachers, or even, finding jobs in other industries. The third leg of Simply Sport, sorry for the segue, but just completing this topic. Third leg of the Simply Sport would be developing more sports in the country so that more people get to play. So we'll be spending a whole lot of time developing rugby in the country. Of course, I got acquainted with this sport because of our trainer network. A large part of our training network comes from the rugby background. So we'll be building that. And that's the answer. That's also answer the second question. Given that, a lot of our trainers do not have in-person jobs, we moved them to digital means. But we realized that we could not, have all of them on board. And I'm sure all of us read the news that we had to, downsize the team. And when we downsized the team, we realized that those people, anyways had nothing to do before. Like a lot of them had no permanent jobs before Cult, and they were back to being that. And hence the inspiration for Simply Sport, where we can find sustainable jobs for these people. Like Cult is a great pool, but even at peak, we'll never hire more than 5,000 trainers. In 2020, we had 2,000. Now we have 1,000 plus, of course, and a lot of them are coming back to jobs. So we'll get back to peak numbers. But then the lacks of people who are aspiring to become sports management professionals, sports professionals. So we want to play a role in some way. A lot of trainers got absorbed in the one-on-one digital training, which is also doing really well. But centers are opening pretty fast, Rahul, and we hope and expect most of the trainers to come back.
Yes. Thank you very much, Ankit. Yeah, we are in Pune, so Pune probably will be one of the, I think, towards the end of the opening up. But yeah, looking forward to getting back.
Yeah, I think Pune was the first to shut down because I think that's where the first case was reported. And probably it will be the last to open. So.
Yes. Yeah. No, but anyway, great job, Ankit. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you, Rahul.
Thank you, Rahul.
Thanks, Rahul. So the next question is from Trupti. Actually, Trupti has a couple of interesting comments also to make. So Trupti, we'll unmute you and you can talk to Ankit.
Hi, I have some friends who've joined CultFit and they're very, very happy with the trainers. They say everybody smiles and it's a very good culture you've started. That's fantastic. Because you don't want to go to the gym, but because of your, so online, how difficult was it? Like, because they used to love to come there and actually work out. So how did your membership become less, or how
no, actually,
did you take this thing? Like, so was it a setback for your whole CultFit?
Yeah, so Trupti, of course, during those quarters, it was a setback for the revenue. But overall membership increased many, many times because now, people were logging in their houses and they were not able to go to the gyms. But of course, online packs are much cheaper because people don't expect to pay the same price as a gym membership when you're working out from home. In fact, a lot of people expect it to be free, but of course, we kept it free for the first quarter, but then we started charging. The numbers are looking very good. So overall membership has gone up many, many times. Revenue will also start coming back because the centers are opening up. We did very good sales for the New Year, etc. So yes, overall business is bouncing back as we speak.
That's superb. And you commented on home cooking. I'm Ashi's mom, actually. I don't believe that even if a cook comes and you cannot monitor the ingredients. I will not. It's not so easy for my generation to order.
Absolutely. So, which is why I actually said that, people, so a lot of people, when they get their food cooked, they're not even home. They leave the keys with their cooks. They leave their keys, below a doormat and all of those things. So I feel that, for a large segment, the food cook needs to be cooked in a certain way, exactly how our moms or our grandmoms would have done it. But I don't think, in the single income families and double income families with no kids and, that kind of a segment, food nutrition and food prioritization is taking place right now.
I suppose, but we really enjoyed your lecture. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Mom.
Thanks, Trupti. The next question is from Ashim. Actually, it's a very interesting point on the futuristic food. So Ashim, we'll unmute you.
Hi, Ashim, you're off mute. Please ask your question.
Cool.
Ashim, please ask.
Ashim, yeah.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Ankit. It was a phenomenal talk. Just a quick question. You spoke about, one, I want to obviously understand the rationale behind spinning out Eat.Fit. If you can talk a little bit more about the thesis behind that. And two, in your opinion, where do you see the sort of next 5 to 10 years of plant-based and cell-based food becoming a part of our day-to-day life? I know in the Western countries, people have started adopting to that. I think a lot of unicorns have been built just around cell-based and plant-based. So what are your thoughts, particularly for the Indian market?
Right. So Ashim, I think the answer to the second question actually, also answers the first question on why we are trying to spin it off. So I also spoke about depth. I also spoke about subject matter expertise for founders to build businesses. I really feel that, food, and this is my personal passion also speaking, I really feel that food is going to be a multi-million dollar opportunity in the country. It's already, and it's very difficult to find exact numbers for food, but I've seen different numbers floating, but it could be a $500 billion market. It could be a $400 billion market in a few decades or 1 decade. And that means a lot of billion-dollar companies will come up. Right now, if I think of billion-dollar companies, the top 3-4 is Jubilant, and Burger King is close to getting a $1 billion valuation. The McDonald's franchisee for South and West is definitely one of them. The Sayaji, the Barbecue Nation might get there, but you don't have a lot of them. So to build a $1 billion food company, you require a decade worth of investment and need to go very deep. The other important part, which I briefly covered during my talk, was the fact that to be able to, build a large business in food, you need to cater to all occasions. The occasion of fence sitters, which is healthier for you, it's going to be the largest segment in the coming years. Where imagine there's a game, IPL game night, six friends hanging out. They will not order a salad. They'll all want to order a pizza, but they would want to order a plant-based meat pizza or a fake meat pizza, and that's what we would create. So if I to absolutely agree with your point on the plant-based protein or plant-based meals. In fact, a lot of good work is happening in India as well. I've met a few startups and a large-scale manufacturer who is doing plant-based protein. The fox meat or the fake meat will be a pretty large category, and I believe that in India we are sitting at least while still 5 years away, we're still sitting on a huge opportunity on creating a lot of soya-based products. If I see some early indicators, the success of soya kebabs in India is just taking off, and every restaurant which was earlier offering a chicken and a paneer dish is now offering a soya dish. So and that's not anyway the high quality plant-based meat I'm talking about, plant-based protein I'm talking about. So yes, plant-based meals is the future. There is enough study now, which supports both sides, but I am a believer, and I feel that if you eat plant-based meal and also if you eat raw, there is no disease which can't be countered. So I really believe in that myself.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ashim. And Mansi, let's invite Rekha to say the vote of thanks, and then we'll continue with the questions, because Ankit, there are more questions coming in. So we'll just close officially and then let the questions flow. So Rekha, please go ahead.
Hi, I can't hear you, Ashay.
I've asked you to start video. Have you seen the? Yeah, there you are.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Ankit. It was really a very fascinating talk on a very fascinating topic, because I think health and fitness and food, right, is something that touches everybody's life, unlike many other things which we might discuss at different points in time. And I think it was also very interesting to see how you have entered a completely new domain, built that domain knowledge and skills kind of thing, and how you use technology, right, to disrupt and to kind of to grow and develop this industry, right, in a very different way. And I guess the pandemic has also helped. A lot of interesting perspectives. Yes, I think my son has been trying to tell me to shut down the kitchen for a long time. I haven't given into his demands as yet, but would have been happy to hear you. But yes, it's been really, really great. Thank you so much, for coming here. And of course, I look forward to hearing the rest of the questions. A very, very big thank you to Ashay and Mansi for organizing and hosting this session. And one quick announcement for those of you who might be kind of, needing to quit now, is that our next event is going to be on Feb 18th. And we're going to have Vineet Agarwal, who is the president of ASSOCHAM, and also he's heading the Travel Corporation of India. Also a CMU alum, I think from what, 96, Ashay?
Yep, 1996.
So we look forward to welcoming all of you for that event too. And with that, I think I'll just quickly hand it back to Mansi to carry on the Q&A, because I think I don't want to take time away from this interesting discussion. But thank you very much, everyone. And thank you all, of course, for coming and attending this event.
Thank you, Rekha.
Thanks, Rekha. Yeah. So we'll take the next question from Vikas Agarwal.
Okay.
Vikas, we'll unmute you, and
there are two of them. Which one? With the capital V or the Big V.
1 second. Give me a second.
Okay,
The capital.
The capital V is now on mute. So Vikas, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you for the lovely session, Ankit, and thank you, Ashay, for organizing this. My question was, in a startup within co-founders of a business, there's generally time is short. So what kind of information sharing is essential? What is non-essential? And what are the guidelines that should be followed for the same? So that the relationship remains good and in the right direction.
Right. So, because a very important point, very important question. And if I take my learnings through Flipkart, Kyofit, and see what's the right way, of course, it's just again my experience. There should be no piece of information which is not shared between the founders. It has to be 100% transparent relationship. There will be topics which require discussion. There will be topics which just requires information being shared. So I think things which are important requires very, very active sharing, active discussion, and things which require just sharing information. A lot of dashboards can be created. A lot of templates can be created which can be shared across the team and between the founders, etc. But a short answer: there is nothing that need not be shared. Everything should be 100% transparent.
Because you have any follow-up questions on that?
Yeah. So would you be able to share any examples in your experience where how you have reached this 100% transparency level? Probably you would have not started that way, or you would have not seen it that way in early part of your career. And how did you all mature the relationship to that level?
So I think because in my case, of course, I've known Mukesh for a longer period. And also, given that he's such a seasoned entrepreneur, I think this realization would have been there much earlier. So luckily, thankfully, we were pretty proactive in building this relationship this way, where there is 100% transparency. And, so I think this is something which I'm seeing more and more startup founders follow, where the starting point there is 100% transparency, trust, and everything. So I would actually say that I'm seeing more and more startups start on that note. A lot of startups, startup founders start with a very clear understanding of how to operate, when to share what, and all of that. So I think this is a very important point. And while you improve on the way, but this is something which requires a lot of focus and dedication right from the word go. And this is not only restricted to the founders. I think it also extends to the founding team members. There are at least 10, 12 people along with you who are, instrumental in building the company. Of course, the entire company is building the company, but the other 10, 12 people whom you will be interacting very, very actively. So I think information asymmetry is something which kills the company.
Absolutely.
The same piece of information is available more and more. Helpful.
Thanks a ton, Ankit.
Right. So we'll take the next question from Rashmi.
Okay. Rashmi, go ahead.
Hey, thank you so much, Ankit, for sharing your insights in such a forthcoming manner. And I really liked hearing about the foundation as well. I briefly worked at GoSports Foundation, which again does similar work and is in a similar space. So my question is, could you talk a little bit about gamification on the CultFit app? I know my brother, for instance, he found the class ranking to be very motivating, and I know that competition is a part of the in-class experience. So you were able to replicate some of that through this feature. Are there any lessons learned that maybe you've used to others who, there's a lot of talk of gamification, but then, what really matters, what doesn't matter? So do you have any lessons for the rest of us?
Right. So I'll answer the question in a general manner first and then come to Kyofit app. I think gamification with so many apps on your phone, with such little time and such little attention span now, keeping customers hooked is going to be more challenging in future. And if you look at apps like Cred, PhonePe, CultFit, Energy Meter, what these features have done is to keep customers engaged, hooked, have kept them guessing. We launched this concept called Fit Cash, where after every class you would get a cash depending on how well you're doing. And then in the digital world, we moved into class ranking with very complex camera technology, which we were developing for a longer period. We're able to, figure out who's performing how. So again, if the camera technology weren't there, our content would be as good as, any best fitness trainer on YouTube. Of course, the content is very good quality, which is what I'm saying. Any best fitness trainer on YouTube could have been, Kyofit. But now, because Kyofit has this gamification, camera technology, community, people competing with each other, that's make what Kyofit is. Likewise, Cred is not any small credit card redemption company now. We've seen these credit card points being redeemed for donkey's years, but we've never seen this kind of an experience where you can use hundreds and thousands of offers. You can use different kinds of vouchers, etc. That's because of the horizontal scale, you're able to build such high amount of gamification. So I think gamification will be a very, very key part for any large technology platform that will be built in future.
Right. Thank you so much.
And then we have a last question from Mrinalini. Is she there?
So let me search 1 minute.
Mrinalini Jaisinghani.
I know. So I think Rajiv uncle, are you listening to this? If you can unmute. Or otherwise, we'll just read the question.
I can just read the question. So the question from Mrinalini is, what in your opinion, are the biggest challenges for entering and expanding the food industry in India, other than, of course, educating the masses about healthy food?
I think the structured food industry in India is where e-commerce was a decade back. E-commerce lacked the ecosystem or partners. We didn't have the best logistics partners and all of that. So similarly, food really struggles with high quality providers. If in 2020 January, when EatFit was at its peak and doing more than 50,000 orders a day, right, the number of providers who could provide us with high quality dairy products, high quality atta, it was very difficult. And that too, if you want to use the same product nationally, and we had a presence in 16 cities then. And to be able to find a same provider, same quality, same benchmark, it was tough. Likewise for logistics, frozen supply chain and all of that. So I feel if cloud kitchens, if food delivery, if takeaway food will become a norm, then all these providers, ecosystems will come together. Another example is packaging. We don't have the best quality. If you go to Japan, if you go to Hong Kong, the food packaging for takeaway is insane. The bento boxes, the coffee takeaway, they're all like collectibles. And in India, either they will come at an expensive price, anything lower price is very, very cheap quality. And while things are improving, I think in the next 3 to 5 years, this ecosystem will develop. And in 2030, I think food industry will be where e-commerce is now. And in the next 3 to 5 years, a lot of infrastructure development will take place.
So I hope that answers Mrinalini's question. Any more questions? I think we have one more question.
From Pradeep Ramka.
Yeah, from Pradeep. Pradeep, do you want to ask your question?
Pradeep, you can unmute yourself and ask the question.
Yeah, sure, folks. Hi.
Yeah, Pradeep, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes.
Ankit, Akshay, Mansi, and Rekha, awesome job. Keep doing it. Yeah. Ankit, I just wanted to add that transparency and information sharing. And I thought if we can sharing of information, that's one is you share information with people. So one needs to information you share with whom. You cannot. There is a difference between sharing information and the role of decision making. There needs to be clarity what information is shared with whom, and for decision making, who's not everybody is to be contacted each time a decision is made. You can share information, but for decision making, it needs to be clearly laid out. Where you need the concurrence of somebody or somebody to interact with you on decision making. Just wanted your confirmation, based on how you operate.
Right. So I'll tell you about my style, and of course, the many different styles. I think if I look at any goals of the company or a list of things that needs to be achieved, identifying a clear owner for every line item is very important. Anything which has more than two, I would actually prefer one owner, but anything which has more than two owners, then the ball will slip through the cracks. It will definitely get dropped. The second thing is if there are a bunch of people, and second is a team. Second is a team. If there's a team which
Log in now.
If there's a team which is working on the project, the information asymmetry, like I spoke about earlier, there have to be equal amount of information available with everyone. So if there's a project being worked upon and there is a vice president in the team and there's an associate vice president and a senior manager, then you cannot have any privileged information with the vice president of the project, because then people are already working with the handicap. So I would say having very clear owners, and on any project having equal amount of information available has worked for me significantly.
Thanks. Ankit, I actually had a quick question as well to piggyback on that. Around the role of mentorship. So I know Rekha and I have talked about this. Like, you come from an IIT, so obviously the people, first of all, who get into IIT are hardworking, and you make it in life and you get into IIT and you have that mentorship network. And now there is a new kind of phase in the US where people are questioning college education. Do I need college? And in my opinion, the one thing it really serves is to build a network of mentors and network around you so that whatever you want to do later in life. So what was the roles of mentors in your life, starting with IIT? And what did you advise someone who doesn't want to go to college and start something? How does he or she build a mentorship network? Because in my opinion, they've been extremely important in my journey.
Yeah, so I think probably I might be old school, but for me, not going to college is an absolute outrageous idea, and I would not recommend it to anyone. Recently, I met a kid in IIT. He's got a brilliant idea, great prototype, commitment to some funding. He asked me, if I should drop out. I gave him a pretty strong piece of advice of doing it later, doing this idea later. If the idea is strong enough, 18 months or 24 months won't change anything. So I am a very, very strong believer in college education. Like I mentioned, it's an outrageous idea for me to not even to advise it to anyone. Coming back to mentorship, I think mentorship is something which, if I look at how I solve my problems, mentorship is a smaller part. But while it has played a huge role in shaping who I am, but it's not my go-to way of solving my problems. My go-to way of solving my problems is literature, books, and existing literature. I think there's so much, like, we are living in such a tiny fraction of the time that has elapsed. There's an answer to all questions that exist.
Right.
So being able to read through problem statements is my style of doing it. I feel that in active problem solving, if you reach out to people, it's not the best way of getting answers. You should meet people, get mentorship for longer term experience building. But if you have a life problem and you reach out to 3 different people to seek solutions, it won't work out. So I am not a believer in active mentorship for real-time problem solving.
Right.
Mentorship for me has come through observation. I have never anointed anyone as my mentor or anything. I have had friends in college or seniors in college whom I was very, very pally to, and just by being with them, I would have learned a bunch of things. A lot of my learnings came in Flipkart by spending a very, very quality time with Bini, Sujit, Sachin. I think that was a very, very useful time, and I really learned a lot. And then, of course, being around people, my team members. I think so I have this strong sense of learning through observation, and that's my way of getting it.
Yeah, when I asked the question because these days, if you read media, read social media, it's like, okay, CureFit is valued at $700 million. Now I'll start a startup and I need to get this much funding, otherwise I'm a failure. When in reality is, like we said, it's a test match, right? What you hear in social media is just the periphery of what actually happens. So, which is why the mentorship question kind of.
Yeah, and on the funding and the valuation piece, I think it's all an outcome. The input is to build a profitable, long-term, scalable business. And some businesses will get valued at X, some at Y. That's determined by market forces, not what you do. So all you can do is, if you've chosen an industry, build a high quality profit-making business or something like that.
Awesome.
Great. I have another question there, Ankit. I know you're an avid reader. What are you reading currently?
I've had a kind of a reader's block in the last few weeks. I am on very random fiction right now, just to get off my reader's block. But the last book, I will tell you the name. I can't remember the name. It was a book. It's called Blitzscaling. So I'm rereading. I reread it. I read it in 2019. It's a beautiful book by, I think, Reid Hoffman, about how to build companies when they have reached a certain scale. There were some good learnings. Sorry, I also read the other one, No Rules, by I think the Netflix. So this is the last book I read. But since December, I've had a reader's block trying to overcome it.
Great. So we don't have any more questions. Rekha, Ashay, do you want to ask any more questions, or we can close the session?
Rekha, do you have any comments or questions?
I think it's interesting to see how you're kind of pivoting into these different roles. And I just wonder, like, through your journey, at any point, have you ever felt that, the challenges were too much, or that, you feel that maybe, like, was this a good idea? Have you ever had second thoughts?
Yeah, I think
any point where
I was reading about some sports person, can't remember who, and the person said that every time I have to get up at 4 a.m. I think it was Sindhu or Saina or one of them. Every day when you have to get up at 4 a.m., you would feel that why the heck did I become a badminton player? Why did I choose a journey? And then through the day, when you live your day and you start enjoying your day, that's when it all keeps coming back to you that, okay, this is a good journey that I've chosen. There are highs and lows. So I would be lying if I say that I don't get these second thoughts every other day. You have to keep yourself motivated. There are days when things just don't work out and it just becomes even tougher. But then there are days when things just work like a charm, and everything you do comes out with flying colors. And that's where you realize that it's a great idea to become an entrepreneur. So I would say staying motivated is an extremely tough art, and it's a combination of success under the belt. You have to choose small milestones so that you feel successful. I can today say that I want to be bigger than Jubilant, and I can feel like a failure for next 20 years.
Right.
Or else I can say I want to do 100 orders extra today, and I can feel like a victor today. So it's about how you position yourself. Yeah, it's very difficult to stay motivated any which ways. Fourth year IIT, I wanted to drop out, but of course that was not an option. I know when I was playing cricket, every time my coach would say one extra round, I would say, why did I take up cricket? It happens every single day. When I'm gymming, I would say, why the heck did I call my trainer today? So it's a very normal thought.
And what do you do to keep yourself motivated? Because it's a tough journey.
One, I think meditation helps. It helps you clear up random thoughts. And second, having a midterm goal. Again, one goal could be that I want to be India's biggest food brand, but the midterm goal could be that by end of this year, we want to do X. Midterm goal broken into milestones. So if the milestones are clear and you beat some of them, you feel good. So I feel motivation is best solved through success under the belt. And you should have weekly, daily, monthly milestones. Even which is why having a bullet list or a checklist works. Even if I decided that by 10 a.m. I want to get my workout done, I want to finish all my meals, and if I've done that, I feel like I've achieved something. But even if there I was lagging, then the day starts. That's how it happens, right? There are days when you're always behind the schedule, and these thoughts become even more amplified. So I think having a daily checklist, having a daily I'm a huge listomaniac. I make a list for every single thing, and just the whole action of cutting it out, ticking it, marking it as a completed task gives you motivation. These are smaller, like from a science point of view, these are smaller shots of dopamine which you get, right? Every time you do something which makes you the body releases dopamine. So I think there are many ways. Of course, food is a great source of dopamine, and one should keep.
And to piggyback on Rekha's question, so do you think the role of sports in youngsters, you actually pursue a sport or learn an instrument that teaches you that discipline and perseverance. And running a startup is like being a sports star, as you said, like Sania Nehwal waking up at 4 a.m. I think this, would you agree that the same logic applies to starting a startup? You have to train like a sports star, right?
Yeah, I think starting a startup requires slightly lesser discipline than running a large operations for 10 years. Imagine the operations head of DHL, running that business for the last 10 years. It requires so much more discipline, so much more patience. And I agree, if you take up a sport or an instrument like violin, which requires minimum 12, 13, 14 years of learning, it makes you you start appreciating the incremental benefits, incremental learning. I was lucky enough to get some of it through my journey with cricket, but I wish I could have also learned an instrument, because every year you only learn so much. It's not as though you get a startup like high very soon. Thing with startups, given that most of the startups are less than 10 years, Flipkart is 12 years, so everything is lesser than that. The best part about startups is that everyone is still in that honeymoon period of extreme highs, including us. I wonder, when we settle down into a role where we're growing only at the rate of GDP plus inflation, how happy or excited we would be. So
yeah. And is there a way? I know after you exited Flipkart, you invested in a bunch of companies. Now, having been through the journey of being a founder and a successful founder, do you look for something like one thing in the person that you're investing? Is that like a trigger point?
90% of the investments have been ex-Flipkart guys, people who worked with in Flipkart, and I really loved what they did. And I think that's knowing the person, knowing the passion behind the person is very important. In some cases, idea plus person has been extremely good. In many cases, the person has been very good. I can't think of one or two beyond. I think I've made 12, 13, 14 investments. I think beyond one or two, I can't think of just the idea. It's my style of investing, where I invest in the team and the person I know.
Yep. Awesome. Well, thanks, Ankit. The fact that we're almost half an hour over time and we still have almost 30 people online, that speaks volumes for how this session went. It was, for me, I love talking to people like you, because for me, it's like learning, like I learn from reading a book. So thanks so much for your perspective.
Thanks, Asha, Mansi, for organizing this. It was really, really good.
It's a pleasure having you, Ankit. Thank you for sharing all your observations. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks everyone.
And thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you for the next event. Ankit will keep you posted for our next events if you can attend them. Awesome. And we hope to do one more with you in the future.
Thank
you.
Thank
person Ankit now, next time.
Absolutely.
In person, yes.
Yes.
Okay. Take care. Thank you everyone.
Bye-bye. Thank you.